Welcome. Today we're going to paint watercolor poppies. We're going to do 3 different techniques: wet on wet, wet on damp, and also a wet on dry at the very end. So you can see here I have painted water onto my paper. I'm painting it in every direction because we're going to do a wet on wet background. I already have my design sketched onto my paper. So I'm just getting this paper nice and wet. I want the moisture to penetrate through the whole piece of paper, pretty much all the way through the back. I want it to be good and wet so when I put my paint, it'll move. So that's important to have enough water on that paper before you start adding paint. So I have some poppies here, I have some leaves, I have some buds, I got a little bit I can do in the background if I want. So I'm just going to start by putting a little bit of rose madder, very watered down, like skim milk, so it's transparent. And when I put it on top of the already wet paper, that's adding even more wet to the wet paint, and it'll thin it out even more. So I'm not being careful about where I'm putting it, just kind of in the place where the flowers will be, goes outside the lines. That's good. I'm going to add just a little bit of orange in here. I want that kind of orangey red poppy, but I still am going to make it very soft, because I want to draw some details in there, and I want you to be able to see them, so I don't want to get too dark, especially at this point, because we can always add more and more layers. So why not pop a little bit of an olive green in here? Just here and there, kind of in the centers where it'll be leaves behind there. And because there's so much water on my paper to start with, this paint is all going to move and blend. And when it dries, it's going to be much, much lighter, probably 50% lighter, because there's so much water in that paper diluting the paint. And you're putting on quite diluted paint. And a little bit of cobalt blue, because there's sky behind the leaves and the poppies. So I'm just brushing it in with a nice big 2-inch brush. The biggest brush you have will work great. And where that blue is mixing in with the rose, it's making a really pretty little purple. You can use whatever colors you like. So there's my purple where it mixed, and I like that purple a lot. And just putting a little bit here, putting a little bit there. Again, not very particular in my placement, but you can see it's all getting very soft and it's mixing and blending. I can also take my board and lift it up and let it flow in any direction that I point it down to, letting gravity do its thing. So yeah, I'm just putting in some paint, just some color in the background. So then when I paint my poppies on top of it, it'll look like something's in the background, something's going on. I want to add just a little depth, and I like this kind of granulated paint. So this is Green Apatite Genuine, and the pigments float in the watercolor, and you can see a little bit of texture in there. So I'm having fun using that here and there, and it's great for a background, especially in a garden scene, because everything wouldn't be smooth and satiny. You'd see all kinds of textures back there. So I'm just softening it out a little bit and letting the paint move with all that water. So just cleaning off my brush, getting a little bit extra blue, a little bit extra cobalt. Got to be careful because it got, here and there it can get a little bit muddy. So muddy just meaning that it makes kind of a dull color. It doesn't pop out and stand out. So it's not really a purple, it's not really brown, it's just kind of dull. So I don't really like that. So I'm adding in a little bit more pops of color. And just smoothing out some of those obvious brush strokes. And I want a little bit of depth in the center. And sometimes out on the corners, put a little depth, a little green. And probably I'm going to just let it dry, let it mix a little bit here on its own, see what happens. And I forgot I wanted to put a little bit of light, so I'm putting a little bit of the lemon yellow. And this is pretty concentrated because I'm hoping it really will show through underneath all the painting I'm going to do on top of this. So I left it a little bit bright, and just where I think that the sun's shining, so if the sun's coming from the top and the right hand side, I think this is where those light lemon yellow highlights would shine. I don't want to mix it too much because, yeah, I'll make mud. So there's lots of opportunities to brighten up your colors yet. Like I said, this is going to dry quite lighter. Adding in just a bit more of the rose madder. Here and there, kind of looking at my painting, seeing where those petals will be, and adding it where I think I'll need a little bit of depth. So just here and there. A little bit of orange now, just on the corner of my brush, using that orange to transition into my reds. And I got a little bit darker violet red here, just popping in a little bit of shadows where there could be maybe poppies behind it, right? So I'm just creating a very soft, loose background, and you'll see when this dries, it's going to be so much lighter, and it's going to blend and soften. Put little shadows behind some of where those buds will be. Yeah, and now I'm just going to let it blend a little, and I have my Viva paper towel here, which has no quilted pattern in it. So some places where I got a little carried away and I think it's kind of dull, I'm just lifting it out a little with the towel. The paper's very wet, so it's going to fill in any of these marks where I lift it out. And I'll coax it a little bit with the brush. At this point, I don't want to add any more water to it or wet paint because it's started to dry on its own. And if I add any water or wet paint to it, I'll get a bloom or a cauliflower or a cloud or whatever you want to call them. But basically, because this paper is drier than the wet paint that I would put on top of it, the wet will push all of the pigment to the edges of the wet puddle. So gotta leave it alone. You can use your dry brush to kind of coax things around, but don't add any more paint at this time. Okay. And I gotta learn to leave well enough alone, but I wanted to add a little bit more color here and there where those green buds are going to be and some leaves. I'm just at this point hoping it won't make a bloom. I can already see it happening, and I just dropped a little bit of water there, so as that dries a little more, I can come back with my brush and move it, or maybe I can tilt it and get it to blend in and thin out a bit with the rest of the watercolor paper and its dampness. So it's kind of working. I'm letting that water kind of even out. I'm tapping it down a little bit, getting it to coax it into the direction that I want it to go. So I'm just holding up my board. So that's the good thing about painting on top of a board. As you can see, I ran out of my masking tape, so I just wet the back of my paper, and because I have this non-porous piece of acrylic that came out of a frame, it'll stick. But when I go to re-wet it, a lot of times it won't stick. It'll start to peel up, and you gotta let it dry again. So when I get some tape, I'll tape it down. But I'm using Daniel Smith, and I think I'm going to use this Pearl Red and a little bit of the orange here and some of the soft purples just to kind of make my poppies. Maybe I won't use that pink. I've got pink in there. So that's my orange. And so I'm using my little dish here. Oh my gosh, I got a mess here. Do you ever do that? The cap was a little messy around the edges, so I gotta wipe that off or I'll have streaks all over my painting. Do it all the time. I'm a messy girl. I'm always making a big mess on everything. Yeah, so I'm gonna grab my number 8 round brush and I'm gonna dilute some of this red paint. I'm gonna keep it thick, kind of like a heavy cream consistency, and I'm drawing a bead that's gonna stand up right off of my paper. So this is kind of the opposite side of negative painting. So I'm painting into the leaf and leaving the outside to be negative. But this will create a hard line on one side and a soft line on the other side where it's diffused more. I'll mix a little bit of lemon yellow to that same consistency and just dab it in the outside of this leaf where the light would be shining, a little bit of highlights. I'm trying to learn my lights and darks, so sometimes it's harder to do that, and I can see it when I'm done with the painting where I need to improve on the next time. So you're always learning. Been painting for quite a few years now, but I'm still learning, and I'm glad I am because it would get boring if I wasn't, right? So now I am just taking my brush that I've cleaned off and I've dried it off, so it's still damp, but I'm just using it to mop up a few of the areas for highlights. See how it just kind of soaks up that paint? And just blending it out. So now I'm going to let that leaf alone, and I'm going to move on to another leaf where it's dry. Petal, I should say. It's a flower petal. So there that one is, and I'm going to move over to the opposite side where it's not going to touch this leaf, because if I paint wet next to wet, it'll all merge together because the paint will foul wherever the water is. So always keep that in mind. So I'm wetting my whole leaf down here. This is a larger leaf, so I like to do that first when it's larger, so I have paint flowing very nicely. And I'm just tapping in some of this color. This is my orange, and then I'm coming back with my red around the edge, and I'm keeping that red thicker because I'm going to feather it out into that orange there. So up here I'm just going to try to blend it. See, I'm going to feather this red into my orange and the yellow that's underneath. I can always drop more color into it, see, like that, give it a more red. And then I have a little bit of purple that I'm going to put in so that it looks like the petals are cupped, so that kind of gives them more dimension. So depending on what kind of poppies that you have, some of them have little dark spots in them. Some of them are shaded. Some of them come in like sherbet colors. Some are dark red. I don't know exactly the species of poppy that I'm painting. I'm just kind of doing this from memory. So what I want is a lot of contrast in my petals. So I'm working on that, and I'm bringing out some of the lines, leaving some of the highlights there, working on my lights and darks. I want to put my shadows in as much as I can here while the paint is all wet, and that it'll move and blend together to keep that very soft, watery look. So I think that purple needed to be intensified a bit, so I went ahead and put a little bit more in there to make it darker. And I'm just tapping it here and there, bringing it outward, kind of looking at the whole thing. So now that petal is dry, and this is just a place where the petal kind of turned around upside down. So this petal, typically actually might be a little lighter and on the back side. So, but I have a nice shadow here where it's turned under, so that top part of that leaf would be covering this. So I'm going to make that more intense. And then as I go down, I'm going to make it lighter. And this is a smaller leaf, so I did not bother to make it all completely wet, because I could control it just with my very thin wet paper. Maybe some yellow right there. Okay, so now while it was damp, and I'm going to show you this again, I went ahead and put in with a number 0 brush all of those little kind of, I want to call them veins, but the poppy's petals are kind of crepey looking. They're very delicate and floppy. So I wanted to give that information to the viewer. So I went and did a few of the little veins in there, making them kind of wavy here and there. And I'm continuing with a petal that's kind of behind, but I think the tip of it might be in the sunlight. So that's where the yellow is. And I'm just kind of wiping it back and blending it together. And on this one, maybe just a little bit of purple could show, or maybe not. Maybe I could just do it with the red. Let's see how that looks. I can always decide if it needs more as it's drying. And I'm just coming in, doing a few of these little veins. And if you do it while it's still damp, it's very soft. You can see how soft it is. So it's not pronounced at all, just very delicate. Put a little bit of orange there. Blending it in. You can see how that little bit of wet paint pushed back the red paint there too. So I'm going to come back and blend with my brush to control that so I don't get a bloom. And here's another petal on the opposite side. Now that those two are dry, I can go ahead and paint on the opposite side, or I could move to a completely different flower if I wanted to. You got to make sure it's dry, that's all. If you need to dry it with the blow dryer, I like to let it dry naturally if I can. But I'm going to come in and do this because it's all dry now. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to leave just a little bit of white between the petals, and I'll come back and soften this edge after. But just to separate the petals a bit. And the light will be on this petal, and I'm putting a little orange in there, and yellow where the light's more intense, and purple from the center. Now be careful, because purple and orange or purple and yellow are going to get muddy. If they blend too much, I like to let it blend right on the paper so that it can not be too muddy. And bring in some of that yellow right on that edge. And while it's all still nice and wet, I can drop in my purple and blend it. Get it around that little centerpiece there. That's going to be black, so I'm not worried about covering it up at this point, because the black will cover it up. And a little bit more red, and some of those lines, like the folds in the petal, the crepey texture. Leaving that edge light for now. I can always come back to it. And just blending with the tip of my brush, adding a little more here and there wherever I think the color balances. And it's dry on this side. So I'm going to come in. I'm leaving a bead. So my thick red paint, you can see it stands up off of the paper, and then I'm just taking water and I'm blending it from that edge into my flower. I added a little bit more red because I didn't want that stripe, where you could see the outline. I wanted it to be very soft. So you can always add more paint. And I'm just spreading it out and also getting the rest of it damp. So I can just come and drop in some color and make it very soft. So you can see I'm making a nice hard edge on one side and it's soft and blendy on the inside, defining the flower. So it's not really a loose flower, but it's not realism either. So we're in between. And wherever that purple would be from the center coming out. And I can see that I'm going to have to go back to that top petal and add a little bit more intense purple. I can do that after it's completely dry, so I can add water over almost the whole petal again and then drop in some colors wherever I feel they need to be. And the same here, I'm just blending that red in. I'm leaving this little area because I think some light might be there where it kind of curves up and out. And the yellow and the red make orange. So I'm also getting that color of orange in there, which I think is pretty. And I'll add a little bit more orange because it's darker underneath, because that top petal's probably making a shadow over this part of the leaf. But I still have that color in there to bring light to it. And just drying off my brush and adding a little bit of highlights by mopping out a few areas. So keep your brush clean, dry it off in your paper towel, and then come back and just lift out some color where it gets a little bit of a highlight. I'm going with the curve of the petal itself. So if everything is coming from that very center and outward. So however it would do that, that's the direction I'm making these. And now I'm coming back with my small brush and I'm just using the very tip very gently, hardly any pressure at all. And if it skips, good. I like that skippy look. And wiggly, make it wiggly. And leave some of those highlighted areas where you probably wouldn't see all this definition because the sun would be intense there. Leave those blank. And come back and put a few more on this one here. Ideally, I want this to be a little bit damp when I do this. I did let it dry a little longer than I intended to, but you can still do it. Just don't use too much pressure and make it very fine and delicate. You can go a little bit darker in the areas that are darker. Oops, we got a little curve in there, I guess. Make a little curved leaf, got a little dark. And where else? Down here, those ones pretty much blended away once it dried. So I'm going to go ahead and come back in and draw in a few more of these little crepey lines. Wiggling my brush. And then here it's still damp on this side. So you're going to be able to see the ideal effect here. Because when it's damp like that, the paint softens around those edges. And they're not such hard lines. So you can come in with a little bit harder of a line because it's going to blend in with the water that's in the paper and it's going to soften. So I'm just starting by kind of doing some directional lines from the center, and then I'll come back and fill in with my wigglies. There. And there's how it looks after it has dried a bit. And now I have two more to do. So I'm going to do the same thing on both the flowers, but the petals are arranged differently, so the shadows will be a little bit different. I'm going to start with this little piece here. And I'm painting in the water because it's a nice big petal. whenever it's a big space, I like to paint water first so that the paint can flow and stay wet the whole time and not dry up on me. Sometimes on the little spaces I can get away with not doing it, but it's always a good practice to do. That's how you get that blended soft look. So I'm using that thick paint on the edges there and letting the water mix it all in. So I'm getting that nice hard line on one side and a soft, fuzzy, diffused on the other side where I'm blending it with the water. There, just like that. And just let it flow and watch it, and you can coax it with the tip of your brush. And this petal goes way over here on this other side, so I just think the sun would be shining right at the tip of that, and maybe right at the edge of that, and I'm going to blend it into this existing petal I just painted. It's still wet, so everything will still blend. I'm taking that real intense red. You can see it sits right up off the page there, right off the paper. So there's a lot of paint in that area. And I'm blending. I'm just blending it in to this part and adding a little yellow, leaving that tip lighter. I want the sun shining there. And right here I want the sun shining where I put that yellow. And I'm just blending it with just water on my brush, and wiping out a little highlight. As I go, I'm trying to keep the same tone as the previous flower. So I don't want this to be more intense red than the previous flower. Now, if it was going to be in more of a shaded area, I would go more intense red. But these two should be getting the same amount of light. So I'm going to go across my flower here and start on another petal. So I'm doing them all individually. And I'm wetting it down. Bringing it into the center. And then I'm going to add in my highlighted area. This is the very top of the petal. It's going to get the most sunshine, like the one we did below. So I'm just putting some soft yellow into this area and then coming back in with red on both sides. And filling that in and bringing in a little bit of water and blending it up into my yellow, which it will make a little bit of an orange. Keeping it soft. Just water on my brush. And just making these kind of brush strokes towards the center, so if it lifts up some of that yellow and red, it's actually adding the wave into the petal. And add some purple for some nice depth there in the center. Make it look cupped in. It's pretty purple. It's cobalt violet. And that's just that little center area there, where all the stamens are going to come off of that. So now this bottom leaf is still damp. I'm just going to take my number 0 with the red and start painting in some of this crepey texture. So like this petal's curving up towards the center, so that edge is the top of the petal, the yellow edge. So as I'm doing my little crepey veins here, I'm thinking about how that petal is coming up from the bottom up to the top, instead of coming right from the center of the poppy. So you can see, because it's still wet under there, it's just damp, they're getting very soft. And bringing them down to the bottom. And you want to add a little bit of dark areas where it might cup in. That looks pretty. Do that. And it's damp up here. Let's see if it's not too wet at this point. Looks like it's working. You want to get that wet sheen off of the paper before you do this. So you know it's still damp without sticking your finger in it, but there's no wet on the top. It's soaked into the paper, and you can see that it's just a little slight sheen on there like satin. Okay, so just going around the poppy and doing the same thing to all these petals. I'm putting in some of that red there because this part of the poppy is underneath another poppy which is above it. So this little section should be dark and it's going to be light at the very, very top where it's not in the shadow. And also because I made it lighter in that same area at the petal next to it, I want them to be cohesive. I'll put a little darker here for contrast against that petal coming up over it. Separate them nicely, blending it out, adding a little more color so I don't get that line there. A little more paint in there, and then the purple center. Gonna need a little bit more paint there, a little more intense, which I'm probably going to have to go back around and even up these intensities. You can see this is more purple, which is what I'm aiming for. And the other ones have dried much softer, so I'll come back after when I can see the whole picture and deepen those up. And this is still slightly damp, so I'm going to go ahead and add my little marks. Thinking about how it would flow from the center of the flower, that petal curving out, so my lines will curve also. All of them point towards the center. I kind of went a little too high there. So I just take my brush and wiped out a little bit and went over it. Hopefully it's going to all dry nicely where I did that. Now I painted right over the wet, which kind of spread it into the rest of it. Didn't want to do that. We'll see how it turns out. I'll dab it a little bit. But I don't want to come in too much and mess with it too much because it's going to make a mark. I'm just wet brush, just kind of trying to blend it, soften it in. Almost got it, didn't I? Just a little bit more. Got to be real careful because the other paint is still wet and it might make a bloom. But I'll just watch it. Oh, this is a bit too wet. Too wet. Come back, see if I can straighten out that. Sometimes I shouldn't be so impatient and just wait for it to dry a little bit. Yeah, it's kind of just disappearing on me because it's too wet. But I can come back in and fix that a bit. It didn't turn out too bad. I still got another petal to go here in the center. So I'm just kind of watching how these petals lay, and this one's coming out from the center, and I don't want it to blend in with the rest. I want to separate that petal, so I left that little white edge like I did on the other one. I can come back and soften that. A little bit of orange where the sun is hitting it. Some yellow. So as you can see, I didn't wet it down first. I am bringing that to the edge because I can still see the contrast. I'll leave that bottom white, I think. And then I'm going to dab in my purple center. And I'm thinking I should have wet it because I want all that to blend in very nice. But I didn't. So I will blend it in with my brush. I could have made it easier on myself if I wetted it first. Because now I think it's going to be light. I'm going to have to go back and add more color. Just kind of dab some in. I got a lot of water in there. So I should let it kind of do its thing. I got a little yellow, just softening that little white edge. Again, I should have just let it dry and come back and do that. I get impatient. I think we all do. It's hard when your brain knows one thing and then your hand just moves on its own. Adding a little bit more dark. I think that should be darker because it's pretty close to the center there. So, and let's see, I'm looking at it and that orange looks a little intense, but I can always come back and add a little bit more of that yellow because it is the same as the other oranges. So I'm drying it with my blow dryer so it doesn't move anymore on me. Just kind of getting it to that damp point to where I can draw in my little crepey marks. And texture in my petals. And painting in a couple little folds. And everything comes from the center. Okay, still got one more big flower here on the top. I'm going to turn my paper around so I can access it easily. That's the beauty of putting it on the board, turning it around and make it comfortable for you to paint. So see how much paint is in that brush? That brush is full of paint and it's standing right up off the paper. So I rinsed it out and I'm just coming back with a clean, damp brush. A little bit of water in there. I'm blending that red out into the poppy, adding in some of the orange. And because I'm blending it into the wet paint, it's all going to mix together. So I'm letting it move, letting it do its thing. I'm going to add a little of the yellow here. I'm blending it into the orange. Adding a little deeper color on that one edge. And then I got to add my purple yet. So I'm just trying to see. It's hard when it's upside down too because you're trying to envision it, but it's upside down. You can turn it back to see. I'm just going with the direction of that petal there. Adding in my purple. So I went ahead and wrapped it around because this petal touches that one just at that one point, but I can wrap it around and then blend it out a bit, get some water on it so it doesn't have a hard edge, and come back to this area where I can put that purple blended into the rest of the flower, make it look how I want it, and wipe out a little bit of dark areas. Whoops, got some purple on my brush. I'll just leave that alone or I'll make a mud. Making mud. And then just coming in and doing my lines. Just a very tippy tip of my brush here. I'm just wanting them to be soft. Leaving that yellow area with less lines. There. And here we go. We're gonna get some of that thick red. Full brush of paint. and just kind of laying a bead onto the edge of that petal, softening the one side, leaving the other side a hard edge. Kind of working around the bud. There's a little stem and a bud coming through there. Blending it in, put a little bit of orange, a little yellow. Just moving the paint, watching how it's drying, putting more red where I think more red would be in the shadows. Try to leave those highlighted areas and bring in some more purple. Bring it out a little farther. And I can see a little bit of a bloom happening at that bottom right edge, but it might be pretty, and it's going with the shape of the petal, so I can always draw in those little crepey veins and use that as a guide. I could leave that alone. It might add to that texture I'm looking for. With every painting, you learn something. So, I'm learning from successes and also mistakes every time I paint. Every time I paint, I can figure out a different way to approach something, or, just makes you more mindful. So the more you paint, the more you get practice, the better you become, just like with anything. Some days are better than other days. Some days everything you do is just so beautiful and you think, wow, I'm really getting it now. And then you go to do the same thing the next day and it's a mess. That happens to us all. I think being an artist is kind of like self-imposed confidence destroyer and builder at the same time. Yep, so many people are like, oh, your work is so beautiful. How do you do that? And I appreciate that so, so much. But I'm my own worst critic, and we all are. I hear it from all of my students all the time, that, no, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. But you got to allow yourself to learn and progress at a natural progression. I mean, the more you paint, the faster that progression will be. But sometimes, you just gotta give yourself some grace and just appreciate what you've done and what you've created and learn from it. So the next time you do something a little bit differently, or you repeat it because it turned out so good. So this is a big petal, and I'm already wishing I had put my water down first. So I forget to do that often, but if you paint fast, it'll work out just fine. But now I'm under the gun, and I have to paint fast, so that water gives me a little bit more room, and it also dilutes it a bit. So now this one is turning out more intense in color than my bottom two because I'm forgetting to do that step. We're all imperfect. That's okay. It'll turn out. It'll work out. I just learned from that. That's what I'm learning. Remember, put that water down first, especially on these big petals. Getting impatient. So I'm going to put my red in here, and also right on this edge to pop that out. So you see how if you put something dark next to something that's supposed to be light, it just really emphasizes it and brings it out, and you get that nice contrast. So there, I did wet my center a little bit because I'm going to end up putting my purple there, so I want it to blend outward. So I remembered I'll put a little water in there so it can start to move. And I'm blending in this orange with a little bit of water, smoothing out some of that moisture so that it doesn't make too big of a bloom. And bringing it out, and that kind of makes the little waves of the petal. It brings that out. And then I'm going to pop in my purple and bring it out a bit. So when I'm popping in this purple, I'm looking at the petals on either side and looking at the flower as a whole. So I want this purple to make sense. I don't want it to come out a lot farther than the purple next to it. You know, it would make it look wonky and different shapes. So I'm trying to keep it even. And I'm not liking how it's drying, so I'm just going to come in with my brush that I've cleaned off, and I wipe it on my paper towel, get as much moisture out of it as possible, but I'm just going to move and blend the paint. And I got another one up here. I'm going in with my bead of paint right in this area, leaving a little bit of white to separate these two, and then bringing my water in. So I'm bringing in water now and blending that out. If I put water on first, that would work, but it makes it harder to keep your darks dark, I guess. You can do it either way. You just got to paint fast, that's all. Just paint fast. And if you're inexperienced, then please put your water down first, because it gives you more time. And I'm bringing that orange up to that edge so that I have contrast. And add some yellow where the sun's hitting it nice and bright right here. And thinking about that purple is going to kind of come off to the side a little bit. So keep it a little lopsided, everything coming from the center. And now I'm adding my purple, and that paint is still nice and wet, and now it'll blend. Well, I like that. That's the effect I want. So that it kind of feathers into the wet paint that I just put down. That's why you got to paint fast if you didn't put water under it. And I'm trying to figure out where is that purple going to end. So I'm going to put a little bit of red in here. Blend it around into the red. And maybe I need to put a little bit more outward. There's my red. I'm just kind of putting some directional lines in with the red, softening out that yellow into the orange right there. Soften that edge. And flip it around and see if it makes sense. So there it is. So it is a little bit darker than the two underneath. Because they dried lighter, so I can do a few things. I can wipe out some of this red, which I'm doing here to kind of lighten it up. Put some red in there. I don't know, maybe I lightened it too much. So I'm going to blend it with my purple. I'm going to have to put some purple in there. First I'm going to try to wipe out some of this. A little bit, going towards the center of that flower. Add a little purple. Don't want to make a line. Still pretty damp, so it's still blending. And then I'm going to just take water, kind of blend it in, wiping off my brush. Got a little bit too much out of that area, so I'm just going to dab it, and get it going. Getting my lines in the direction towards the center. And that bottom petal there, I should have maybe took some more out, but now I'm putting the lines in, and okay, it's all right. That's what I mean, you gotta pivot. It's gonna dry lighter. It's gonna dry a little lighter. In the end, it'll all look just fine. And nobody will notice much but me. I'll notice it every time I look at it, but other people probably won't. There, it's definitely darker, but I'm going to leave it alone, and next time I paint, I will definitely learn from this. And maybe if I make things around it a little darker, I could go back and add dark to the two flowers underneath, but they're so pretty the way they are. I don't really want to mess with them. So I moved on to the bud, as you can see. I'm just using a little bit of yellow first and then some sap green on the edges. And I'm just going to make a wavy stem. Stems are wavy on the poppies. I think that's so fun. Adding a little bit more of the yellow to the one side. I left the top of my little bud a little lighter too, where the sun would be shining on it. Right in there. And just adding some of that sap green and trying to make a shadow. And I got a little dry brush, and I'm just going to take the edges of it, make little hairs on my poppy, because they're fuzzy. They have fur. I'm just taking a little brush now and just painting a few little hairs on here and there. Just very delicately. And I'm painting in my leaves. And I'm just using that sap green and just putting it here and there. And I can add a little bit of yellow to it to give it a little highlight. And a little more green, a little darker on this side of the leaf maybe. You can leave some of those white spots in there. That looks good at this point. But I gotta come through and probably fill some of that in as I'm blending. So, yep. Adding a few more shagginess to my leaf. And underneath the bud would probably have a little bit of shadow. So I'm going to put that in and bring it up a little bit. Blend it in and down on my stem, because that would shadow that part of the stem. Little hairs. And adding a little bit more intense right there at the bottom, and it'll bleed into the rest. And I got nail file, and I'm just going to draw in some of the veins on the leaf. So what this is doing is making an impression into the watercolor paper that's wet. It has to be wet. And you just take something hard. It can be the tab off of a bread bag, or it can be a credit card that you've chopped up, and just anything. It makes a little indentation in there, and as the paint moves and dries, it'll puddle and pool into that little indentation and make a line that you didn't have to paint. Much easier to do it with something hard like that. So now I'm just doing another stem. So I'm starting with the yellow. I got a lemon yellow here. And I'm just painting in my curvy stem and my leaf, adding some yellow and some green, and adding in the green around the bottom of the bud, and I think the underside here would be green where the sun might shine a little bit on the top side. Just blending that into that sunny top and coming down. And there's probably a lot of shadow underneath that flower petal, so I'm going to bring some green into that. Come up. There's a little shadow under that flower. There. And the same thing underneath. There's going to be shadow on the one side and a little shadow where that leaf is casting a shadow. petal and blending it up into my leaf. A little green, a little sap green, and it's probably darker under there because it's underneath the poppy, and this leaf is going behind that poppy stem, so it's probably dark. It's in the background. I'm going to put a little blue in it for some shadow, make it darker, a little cobalt. I take that back, that was purple, I'm sorry. That was the same purple that we used in the poppy centers. I'm just drawing in those little veins. And you can see how it's kind of settling into that groove I just drew in there. And the little hairs coming off. I'm basically using the wet paint from the stem to paint in these little hairs. You don't have to do that, it's pretty tedious. Adding paint where I need to, but just a couple little hairs here and there, and around the top of the fuzzy buds. See them? Barely can see them. There they are. So here, I'll show you close up what I did. I'm doing yellow. And coming back with the sap green. Adding a little bit of shadow with the purple right under that poppy. Clean it up a little. Right in there. And now I'm just taking my brush, it's dry, and I'm just letting those bristles flare out and painting a couple fuzzy spots. But see where you dip it into the paint, it gets a little harsh there, but just do it once in a while here and there and it'll look like you did it intentionally. There's one. There's a few. Yep, we'll go back, put a couple in. And then do the same thing on both sides. Oh, got a little too much on that side. It'll be okay. All right, so that's how I did the stem. So now I have more buds, more stems and leaves to do. So we're going to do the exact same thing, just on the others. And even though those stems are going to cross, I keep it individual. So I skip over where that other stem will cross over this one. So then when I paint that one, there'll be a natural little line that occurs when the two paints mix or touch each other. So you don't make it all just one thing with no definition. You want to keep them separate and let them dry. And then I'm just going to add my shadow. A little touch of purple. Bring it down a little. It's probably shaded because of that poppy above it. Kind of thinking about that. And the back side here would be shaded. I'm just blending it with water. I'll do this one now because that leaf is completely dry. See if you look at it closely where I drew those lines in with the nail file. So that, I didn't paint it all. That's just from where that indentation is, and then the paint will pool into those grooves that you made in there with the nail file. Pretty fun trick, huh? I like that. Sometimes I can do that too, where I want to define an edge. You can just and you don't want to really draw a line, but you can draw a line with the nail file while it's wet, and it'll pull into that area and it'll make a line, but it's the same color as the rest of the paint, which is nice. And just making my fuzzy wuzzies. Fuzzy fuzzies. I think it's one of the things we love about poppies. They have fuzzy edges, they're floppy and soft, they're so colorful and happy. They're a very beloved flower for sure. People love poppies. I do also. Paint this stem now that this is dry. So I can come on in with this. You can see all that background paint that we put in there and some of the granulation from the green. It's kind of sitting on the surface, giving it a nice texture. But see how soft it turned out because there was so much water in that background paint. And it just turned out very, very soft as it dried. So that's why we could throw in paint here and there and see how splendid and wonderful it turns out. You don't have to do that. It does it itself. You just drop the paint in and it'll soften out itself. Fun stuff watercolor is, huh? Okay, painting in the leaf with just some of my yellow. And then I'm going to come back in with my green. Dropping it in, the sap green. Sap green's a great natural color. Good for nature paintings. And I'm trying to separate that stem from the leaf. So I'm going to go a little darker behind where the stem is and then blend that out a bit into the rest of the leaf. Blending. Define the edges. Adding just a little bit of dark there where it's coming over the top of that stem. And then I'll come back, blend it with just a damp brush. Fixing anything that I want more defined, and come back with my nail file and drawing in my little veins on my leaf. Just drawing them in with the file. And you can already see them where the paint's pulling into that area. And coming back with my little brush, separating the hairs a bit and seeing if I can't get some fuzzies. Got to get some paint on it, but I'm trying to keep my brush dry so I'm not putting too much paint on at one time where I get that big blob. I just want to keep them little fuzzy hairs. And just very delicately coming back, spread my bristles again, but now they're a little bit more wet, so I gotta be careful. Okay, and with that same little zero brush, I'm taking some lamp black and I'm just making a little kind of daisy shape in the middle where all my stamens are going to come from, and I'm making that dark center of my flower. And now I'm going to come and make some little quick strokes to make some stamens, kind of letting them crisscross, some longer, some shorter, making them random. Don't want them to be all the same. And then I'm going to little dots, kind of sideways dots, little, I think they're seeds on the tops. And I'm just putting them inside and outside, and some of them aren't even connecting to a stem. That's okay. Or a stamen. You can draw a few here and there and stop wherever you like. They might come across that front petal too if you wanted. So we'll do it again. In this one I left the center white, so my little star daisy shape was going to show up a little better here. And I'm painting it in the direction that I think the flower would flow from. And I got to paint a little bit on the other side right there. Yep. Okay, and then I can draw my little stamens. Careful not to lean on your wet paint. You can see how quick motion I'm doing. It's easier that way. If you do it slowly, it makes them too thick. I like a lot of stamens. Yeah, a few more. Some little ones that aren't even connected. And now with my darker flower up here, we're going to try to blend it and make sense of it before the end of this painting. We are going to do something. But anyway, that's how it is. Now one thing I could do is wet the whole flower, take a paper towel, press it down, absorb some of the paint. When I do that though, you can do that like 2 or 3 times and it'll lighten it up. But then I'll have to repaint the flower, and I think it is going to look like you're going to see that I did that. I'm chicken to do it, so I'm not going to. I just got some of these little stamens peeking through here. And these little, I'm doing this in the purple, but very diluted quite a bit, and I'm just making these little, kind of like a star shape where the bud will open. And this one is a spent flower, so this is what's left over after all the petals have fallen off, and that's that center of those flowers. And it kind of makes like a little cap over the top. And this one's not open yet, so I'm just gonna do my little star. So now I'm adding just some water very carefully. You can stop at this point. It's a beautiful painting right there. Just stop right there and have a nice light airy painting. But I'm going to add in a bit of a background. I want to make it dark because I want to do the bokeh effect. So I wanted it to be a little darker. And the bokeh effect, if you don't know what that is, it is, I guess if you think about Christmas lights and someone taking a picture of Christmas lights and the little out of focus lights that just appear to be little round circles, very soft, that effect that happens with your photography is called a bokeh effect. I think it's spelled B-O-K-E-H, something like that. It looks like it would not be called bokeh, but when I looked it up, it was bokeh. So I remember Boca Raton, Florida, and that's how I remember how to pronounce it. But it wants to be like bouquet. So I'm adding in blue and green and purple and just trying to get a very variegated, I guess, blotchy, soft background. I'm bringing the yellow in because the light is shining right in there, and I'm kind of blending. And I should have used a little brush right around here. It would be more helpful than this big brush that I'm using. So I'm going to have to be very careful and work my way around that bud, that little top on there. Now I want to keep both sides wet, so I'm going to bounce back and forth, back and forth. So now I'm bringing in a little bit of sepia for some drama. So I'm going to bounce over to here before this dries and put a little bit of green. So I'm leaving one side darker, one side of my painting lighter. This is the light side, so I got a little bit of green and blended it into the yellow. And I'm just bringing some water through so I have a little bit more time to work on it. And I'm just blending that in. So I'm going to go back out into these other areas and add a little bit more drama with my sepia. And I'm really changing the look of the painting at this point. But the reason I'm doing that is because I'm trying to make my dark flower pop out a bit. And maybe it won't be as noticeable that it's darker than the other two. So I'm just playing here and seeing what happens, and I'm adding in those dark colors. And I better get back to my edge there before too long, because if I don't, it's going to make a line. So I'm just blending this out. I'm using a little green for the transition. And I gotta blend that all in before it dries. And I can't put too wet of paint there because it'll make a bloom, which I like in the background, so I wouldn't be upset. But just working it around to where I can get to a point where it can stop. And I gotta get back to that left side. I'm letting that dry too much, so I'm getting back in there with my water. But because I had put water on there beyond the color, so see how I put water in there, it gave me more time to work with it. And I like the purple, so I'm going to bring the purple up into my sepia, and it is mixing together on its own and making a very moody background. But it'll be nice for that bokeh effect. It'll pop, it'll really show, it'll pop out. So I'm in here and I'm blending my water down so I have more time to play around a little bit. And I'm going to bring in some yellow and blend that into it. And it's into my greens a little bit. And into my flower, I am taking the point. This is called a cat's tongue brush. It's got a point on it. It's a flat brush with a very, very pointed tippy tip, which is good because you can use it without having to switch brushes up. You can get into some of those small areas with the very tip of it, and you also have a nice big flat brush to move your paint around. You always want to use the biggest brush you can to achieve the effect that you want. So now I'm deciding, so I got that moody sky, which makes sense with my darker flower up there. How far do I want to go with this moody background? So I'm just kind of thinking and blending at the same time around here because it kind of got striped and I want to blend it out a bit. I got that edge down to where it blends into the rest of the painting, so it's okay if I let it dry at this point and walk away and come back after it dries. It's pretty just like that also, but I decided I'm going to go darker, so I got that sepia. I've never done this before with this color. You don't see me use any kind of brown very much. But I'm a very bright, colorful person. I like lots of bright, happy colors. So this is pretty deep for me, deep and moody. But why not? I like it when other people do it, so I'm giving it a try. So just experiment. You know, it's not the end of the painting. I mean, it'll look good. So I'm just going to experiment. And right in that center, I'm going very dark. And I'm thinking I gotta blend it out light to the other side. That's what I'm wanting. And I want my buds still to show, but I've got that same green right there. So getting some of that sepia and blending it out. Blending it out and moving it into my lighter side, lighter of the background there. Define that edge. Take my big brush because it's easier to blend with that big brush. Blending it down and out. And I want to soften it a little bit in that dark area. We're getting water and putting it on there and trying to move it out of those little edges and make it soft and blend it in. I'm going to go over on this side because this side has to be the same value as the other side. So I want those to blend and flow together, so I want it the same dark as the other side. So I put my sepia in there and a little bit of purple on the top because you see the purple's coming down from the left corner. Just put a dab of that in there. That one turned out pretty nice. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to bring in that sepia and just in those very centers where it would be very dark, just to highlight those flowers more. And I think now with the darker background, that darker flower on the top isn't bothering me as much. So never stop painting because you think you made a mistake. That's a good lesson that I've learned along the way. So sometimes I think, oh, I made a mistake. What do I do now? Oh, I just have to start over. But what's it gonna hurt except for some time to keep on painting? If you don't like it and you paint on it and you still don't like it, you've lost nothing but some practice time that you can learn from. So you really wasted nothing at all. But it also could be the opposite. It can turn out much better and you can come out with a painting that you love. And now you've learned that your mistake was not a mistake at all, that you're going to do it intentionally on another painting. So I like to just keep going, keep trying, don't give up. It's not a failure until you quit. So don't give up, keep painting on it. And you can get too dark. Yes, you definitely can just get too dark where you can't go back. And then you can take some acrylic markers and draw on top of it, or some acrylic paint and add that to it, and now you have a mixed media painting. You could add collage papers to it and leave some of their watercolors show through and have the parts have some collage going on. There's just so many things that you can do, and you're always learning. Every time you experiment, you're going to learn from it. Positively or negatively, you're going to learn. So it's not a waste of time. It's a learning experience. So now I'm thinking I want to add that color to the bottom, and at the top I had mixed the sepia into the purple, so I'm going to do the same thing in this corner so it's not odd looking. I got to bring that purple into the background some more. So I get my big brush out so that I can move that paint a little easier, and I like that kind of brush stroke texture it's making in the background. Reminds me of like an oil painting. So that big brush is doing that for me. So I want that purpley brown on the opposite side of the stem, so it looks like it's cohesive. So I'm putting the sepia in my little brush because it's a tight area. And in here too. Well, I got the little brush going. And in this area, I still have to lighten it and add the purple to it. Because right now it's so separate. That's what you don't want. But I'm trying to get that same color. So I have to put both colors on here, and I want it to mix on the paper. So that's why I'm doing it now. Drop in my purple. And spread that around. Put some purple up here. And that other side was lighter, so now I'm just taking my damp brush and just lifting up some of those puddles so that it'll look the same on both sides. And I'm doing the same thing up here, first starting with the sepia. I chose this sepia because it's a cool brown. It's grayish brown. Good color for shading. And I'm going to blend it up into my yellow up there. Kind of want to leave the corners dark and have that ray of sun coming down kind of on an angle onto that other side. Purple. So you can see like the sections that I'm painting. So I'm come back and blend the background into these sections with a glaze, with a thin layer of paint. If I need to, I can just add really thin down washed out paint and add a little bit more depth or more color. I'm blotting with my towel because I'm getting too dark around the edges. It's kind of puddling in those edges more than it is in the center. And I want that blotchy look, but not outlined look. I don't really want that outline, so I'm really working hard in there to try to soak up some of that paint, blending it out so that it'll match. You gotta look at the painting as an overall painting at this point, and you want those lines in there in that background to be the same on either side of the flower or either side of the stem itself or the leaves. So it's nice to have these little sections where you can stop and not have to worry about it coming back to it and leaving a line where you stopped and started. So they're small enough where you can complete it all, even with this little brush, fairly quickly before it dries. And I'm adding that sepia. I'm thinking, oh, I'm getting too dark in these small spots and it's hard to blend it out. So you gotta keep it a little bit lighter and darker in the center. So I'm putting that purple in and trying to make it the same color as the other side, so I'm gonna have to wipe some of it out. But now I got to think about this dark area coming down, so the next section right here to the right is going to be dark because it has to make sense with the top and the further right side. So that sepia has to be a little darker on this side of the stem of the poppy, but it has to be light on the other side to blend in with the left side of that little stem from the bud. Blotting off some of it, kind of giving it a blotchy look, which is what I'm going for. So that side looks like it can go towards the other side. And then the same thing down in this bottom section. That's a blending. And it's going to end up having to be kind of darker on the one side, so I'm keeping that in mind. But I got to put that purple in. Purple to go with the top, bottom, and the left side. Okay. So now I got this darker, it's lighter down here and darker towards the flower. But see how when you put something dark next to something light, it pops it out. It's a good tip to know. Also, I didn't stop. I put a background in here, so I'm covering up all my little hairs. You can't see them anymore. So if you wanted to stop before I did all of this background, you can. Your hairs would be there on your stems, but now I am painting over them, and they were so light that they don't show up. And I'm not going to put them back on because I would have to put them light, I think, and I don't want them to show up that much. So I'm just thinking about the depth there of that, and I'm putting in that granulated green genuine hue, apatite hue, green apatite genuine. That's what it's called. And I just dropped a little bit of that in there for that granulation, and also to make it nice and dark like I did on the top. And those granulated colors are hard to blend, so you got to have enough water so they move, because those little particles float on the surface of your paper. And that's what gives it that granulated effect. A little green in here because there's probably a lot of green foliage behind all of this. I'm thinking I gotta put more purple. So this background has changed the whole feeling of this painting. It's much more dramatic now. Before it was light and airy, and now it's more dramatic. I'm continuing going around with my sepia. I got really too dark there. You gotta work quickly so that it stays wet so that it can blend. Otherwise it'll leave the lines of where you're outlining it like it did there to the one to the left, but there's ways to fix everything. So continuing on, thinking, okay, now I gotta get lighter, but not too fast. To go to the right side, it's gonna be much lighter. I'm just painting this in. All these little areas. Gotta use my smaller brush. Much easier to blend it with the big brush. Less strokes. I'm coming back here while it dried a little bit so that it doesn't push the paint away. And I'm just I came back on that left side, added a little more depth. I can do a little bit more. Oops, I went over a little bit. And just kind of budge it in there a little. Yeah, shadow on that leaf. Okay, lighten that up, blend it in, make it look more intentional. Little tiny section here, and I'm thinking, how fast do I want my dark area to turn into a light area? So it has to be the same color on this side of the poppy, and it's not a big space, so I think it all has to have a little bit of that darker color of the sepia and the purple. It's too small of a space to transition so fast. So I think that this whole bottom of my painting could stand to be darker, blending up into a lighter corner. That would be beautiful. I'm sorry I'm off the frame there on the bottom there. I'm just blending down, same thing that you've been watching. Okay, so now I've got big areas to paint. I still got to paint all around that bud and that leaf while painting fast. So I'm adding some color down in this very bottom right corner. I'm adding some of that green because there's leaves back here, I'm thinking. And I'm going to paint a few little negative painted leaves in there. So I'm going to go ahead and make some green, and it has to be a little darker because of the other side of the stem. So I'm adding some sepia into the area where the green is. I'm going to try to blend it slowly up into that top corner, wherever I can make it light enough. So I'm bringing in some water here. I'm going to put a green on my brush, adding in some water, some green, letting it do its granulating thing there, outlining carefully with my smaller brush. And I think I can blend it light, make it light and blend it all the way up, getting in those little areas. I'm just watching it as it dries, because sometimes I'll get a little line where I stopped and where I started again, or more water than other areas, you might get a bloom. So just checking and blending wherever I find that happened. And now I'm just trying to blend this into what I call nowhere land. So just so that it all blends and it doesn't show where you stopped. And now in here I can see I gotta match this side of my leaf or my stem, the background with the stem and the other side. And I had purple up here in the sky, so I want to bring my purple into it. But I gotta bring some green and some sepia so that it all matches. I'm going around my bud and just softening it into the existing background, just with water. And then I'm coming back in now with some sepia, just carefully outlining with my little brush. And trying to work fast. I like the contrast of the blotchy background to the feel of the flowers. Make it not so precise, maybe more loose in the background. And I'm getting my cat's eye brush here, cat's tongue brush, blending it out a little bit. Softening some of the areas that didn't blend as well. Keeping it a little blotchy. And I don't want that line so defined, so I'm trying to soak some of it up and blend it out. Maybe add a little more paint so that it'll blend a little easier. Add more paint. There. That fixed it. Okay. Get my other brush out so I can get my little marks even with that side. And bringing it down. Got a little too dark right there. Okay. And I'll come match that side to this side. Add just a little bit of color in there, not too much, because I just want it to blend into my lighter side of my painting. really watering down this color. We've got to match so that it all looks like it's all evenly behind the painting, but I'm moving it around from light to dark, so let that dry over there for a while and come over to this side. Now this side has to do the same thing. I got to deepen up from the center. So I really made it harder on myself, didn't I? That's because I want to do that bokeh effect and I really want it to show. So making the more color in the background. Just wanted something fun to show people. And little techniques. I love all the little fun little extras you can do in watercolor that kind of paint themselves in there or make it look really unique and fun. So I like to use salt and cellophane and alcohol and bubble wrap and stencils and all kinds of stuff. I love to play around with all that. I have a Facebook page that is a group called Creative Watercolor Art Club. So welcome you if you're a painter, if you want to join it, and you can post pictures on there, do challenges together. You can see what I'm painting, what I'm doing, and what other people in the group are doing. And then you can leave your nice comments and gentle criticism for people so that they can learn if they've asked a question. We all want to be very, very friendly on this group, so I won't let people make mean comments. I'll delete you, so only nice stuff. But anyhow, I'd like to invite you to join if you're interested in that. Okay, so my center is dark. I think that needs to be still a little darker right in there because of the other side of the leaf, how dark it is. And also, it'll set apart my poppy, make it stand out. I'm going to blend that out to the side just a little bit gradually. That needed to be defined anyway. It was so light, but it's good. And just blending with water. And just looking at it as a whole now. I'm thinking, that's too dark and that's not dark enough. Just taking some of that paint and putting it over on the other side, blending it in. Take my big brush. So now I'm going to bring in some leaves that are painted in with the negative painting technique. So I'm just outlining my little leaf in here. I just kind of like that effect, like kind of a ghost leaf. And it also helps to soften some of those areas that you didn't like how the paint dried. We got some tricks for that, so this is one of them. So wherever you think, oh, I wish that didn't turn out dark right there and too light on the other side. So I'm going right there especially. I can see a few points where I want to do something else too. So I am going to start adding these negatively painted leaves. So I'm doing that same kind of bead of paint, except I'm not painting the inside of the leaf. I'm blending it into the background. So the hard side is now on the inside of the leaf, and the soft side is on the background side. So just blending in my leaf and then blending that into my background and into my, blending it into the other leaf and, making it a soft transition. I'm not going to do too many of these leaves. I don't want it to get overly complicated. But a few here and there are pretty. Then we'll put them in. Oops, too much. There. And how about one over here, maybe underneath the stem. So I'll kind of draw it in. You can draw them in with a pencil, which probably would be a good way to do it. I'm just thinking I can do it randomly, so that's how I did it. Just kind of loose. I'm just blending that paint out now into the existing background. Don't want to lose my little light area there, so I have to be careful. And then finish the sleeve. They're kind of shaggy looking leaves, kind of wonky. If I remember right, I think that's how they are in the poppies. I'll do another one at the bottom here. Maybe I can fix that background a little bit more. So that's why I wasn't worried too much, because I knew I was going to come back and do some of these leaves. And it'll help blend it all in. Yeah, it's just a little bit of interest, I think, just something interesting, and wow, that's different than all the other leaves, what made her think of doing that? So, just kind of gives the viewer a little, not engagement, what do I want to call it? Investment into it. So I did a few more leaves just there on the bottom, maybe one more over there, maybe not. Yeah, let's go for it. And just blending that in. Blending it up into the other background. Make that edge disappear. Make it disappear. Okay, coming back in here. Adding this leaf. Whoops. Okay, then come on back. Quick blend this in before it dries. I gotta go back to the other bright spot right there. Okay, round that off a bit. And like that leaf shape. See, that's why it might be helpful to draw it with a pencil. Okay, so on to the bokeh. This is scrubby brushes. These are scrubbers. They usually come in a set of 3. I think Creative Mark made these ones. Different companies make them. The bristles are stiff and hard. And if you wet it and you get a paper towel and you dab it off in your paper towel, you can actually scrub out mistakes. You can scrub out little circles for the bokeh effect. It is actually tearing a layer of paper off. You can do it real faint like that. You can do some bright ones and then some faint ones. So right now I'm just starting with the bright ones. And then I can come back and do some faint ones if I want to by not scrubbing as much. But see how it just took up a little layer of paper there? So you want to blot that paper off so that it doesn't dry and leave a mark on your painting. So I'm just taking my towel and just blotting it off. So I'm just going to put these here and there. Not too many. It's almost like lightning bugs in the background of my moody painting. It's kind of getting dark and there's little orbs of light coming through. It could be a really good effect for snow, or like I said, lights, good for lights. This kind of gives you that dreamy atmosphere. Things are floating in the air, which in reality are probably dust particles, but oh, don't mind me. So here where I have a lot of that sepia, it's taking away. making quite a contrast between that white paper underneath. So I want to make sure my spheres are round and not too wonky because they're going to show up. Where in the lighter areas, you can not worry about it too much because they're so soft you don't see that edge in such contrast. You can see where it takes the paper right off there, and there's a spot right in the middle there. And I should go over and try to blend it out. There we go. And I'm coming around the back side. I'm turning my brush so I can get nice spheres of light poking through my atmosphere in a daydream. Just trying to round it a little more. Sometimes you gotta leave well enough alone too, and maybe you put another one on top of that, a lighter one. You can use any size of the brush, so there's 3 sizes. I'm using the larger one to make these. And I can make some larger spots and smaller spots, so they don't all have to be the same size. So you can see in the lighter areas it doesn't show up as much. It's much softer, which is why I wanted to leave some light around the edges because I want that dreamy look. Just trying to round it out. And I'm going to keep repeating this process and just do them here and there. I can come back and do a little more in one area if it looks off balance. I can overlap them, put them closer together, don't space them all the same space. They can go over the poppies if you want, put a few over it so the whole thing is kind of in that dreamland. I'm choosing to just put them in the background because I spent all this time making these poppies and I don't have the heart to put a little white mark over the top. But that one I did a little softer. And I'm just trying to shape it using the brush. The brush is rounded on the end, so it's easy to shape it. And blot it. And it's a little bit softer still, but a lot of that paint come off. But if you've made a horrible mistake on your painting and you have these scrubby brushes, you can go over your painting once or twice with the scrubby brush. But when you go to paint over the scrubbed area, the texture of your paper will not be the same. It's going to grab that paint much darker than the rest of it. So I like to use this to bring out white, the highlights, but I don't like to paint over it. Sometimes you can get away with it. Depends how good you are, I guess. I've seen people do it and paint over it and it looks fine. You can't even tell. I've not had that success. Mine you can always tell. Another way to remove paint is just by using a Mr. Clean Magic Eraser. You can wet that, cut it into little tiny pieces, and then wet that, and then you can scrub some of the paint and then blot it with the paper towel and go back like 3 times at the most, and to lift up some paint. Another way to correct a mistake would just be to get water. Take the water, put it on where your mistake is, and then just press the paper towel down on top of it to blot it. And then you can do that a few times. But everything you do will compromise the texture of your watercolor paper to some extent. So I guess sometimes you just try to make your mistakes look intentional by adding to it and then maybe adding something around the painting that makes it look like they belong like that. So that's a secret. Make things look intentional. So don't just let one mistake stand out on its own. put it somewhere else, something that looks similar, maybe not exactly the same. It depends on what your mistake is, of course, but just a couple tips there. As you're watching me, keep scrubbing, putting them in more random order. Don't want them all in lines or all the same space. So I'm thinking about that now. I'm thinking, yeah, I gotta add some a little closer, but I can always go back, add smaller ones closer to my bigger ones, or add even bigger ones than these ones. So it's all up to you. So I'm just going to put them in the background here and there, and I'm going to try to put some different sizes in there. And I think this also draws the eye outward into the painting. You don't see my darker poppy on the top. It does help. It does help. It's not perfect. I still know it's there, but everyone I've showed it to said, oh, what are you talking about? So I don't know. Not everybody sees the same as I do, which is good in this case because they like it. So we had a class at the gallery where I painted this painting, and everybody painted either one flower or they painted the whole thing. And they were absolutely beautiful, so it worked very nice for that. So now I'm thinking, I don't like that line right there. How can I get into that without painting too much over it? I'm going to get some water. I'm painting over the stems just slightly. I'm going to make this a big one. Make this a big spot so it's actually touching the one underneath it. There's the paper. See how it picks it up? Blot it up. Don't want to rub it. If you rub it, that paper will roll into the rest of your painting and make a mark. So I wanted to make this one a little bit lighter. You know, leave some of the color there, but I ended up getting a splotch in the middle, so I had to go with the white. So I went ahead and overlapped it over the top of the other one. There, now they're not. They're more random now, and I'm just kind of rounding out this one, defining it a little bit more, getting a little bit more paint off so that it's a little separate. You can see from that one, and because I did it in one spot, I will repeat it several times around the painting where I've got them touching each other like this. Okay, and I'm just going to blot it, bring it up, bring it down a little bit more towards the petal. Don't really want to go into the petal though, so I'm going to blend it as much as I can. There, I think that'll be fine. Okay, so you can see the effect we're going for there, and then on the lighter areas, they're very soft. So if you stopped your painting before we put all of this fussy background in, and you wanted to still do this bokeh effect, you certainly could, and it does show up. See? Just very soft. It's a softer look, and that's beautiful. So be creative. Do your thing. Whatever that, however it pleases you, do that. You know, if you want turquoise in it, like some of my students, we all love turquoise. I'm included in that group. If you like that, then go ahead and use that color in the background. Or if you want your poppies to be orange and turquoise background, that would be beautiful. So just because it's different than what I'm doing, it might be even better, you know. Doesn't mean it's not right. There's no right, no wrong. But I want to thank you all for staying to the end and watching my video. And if you haven't already, you know, I got to ask you to like and subscribe. It helps grow my channel, especially the likes, especially the comments. If you would comment, that would be great. You're really going to help me grow my channel. That way YouTube will spread it out to people who don't follow me. And then I'll get some of their friends too to follow me. So that's how it all works. So we're always begging for these likes and subscribes, but we just appreciate it, if you will. If you just want to watch and don't want to do that, that's fine too. Yeah, so there you can see, putting some close together, some farther apart. So until I meet with you again on YouTube, peace and love. Bye-bye.